My name is Brielle Andrews, 35 years old and a graphic designer from Boston. All my life, I chased my parents' approval like it was oxygen, despite their perpetual coldness. Then came that Thanksgiving dinner that changed everything. The night my parents uttered those devastating words no child should ever hear in front of our entire family. What they never expected was my response, which left the entire room frozen in stunned silence. Before I dive into what happened that night, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength when family fails you. Growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut in an upper-middle-class household with perfectly manicured lawns and a colonial-style home that belonged in a magazine spread, I always felt like something was missing. My parents, Harold and Martha Andrews, were pillars of the community, my father a respected corporate attorney and my mother a former beauty queen turned charity organizer. They had an image to maintain, and that image dictated everything in our household from what we wore to whom we associated with. Appearances always trumped emotional connections. I was the middle child sandwiched between my older brother Thomas, the golden firstborn, who followed in our father's footsteps to become a lawyer, and William, the baby of the family who could do no wrong. Being the only girl should have made me special, but instead it seemed to make me invisible. Thomas got the praise for his academic achievements. William got the affection for being the youngest, and I got criticism. Always criticism. From my earliest memories, I tried desperately to earn their love through perfect grades, winning art competitions, being class president, anything to make them notice me. I still remember bringing home a report card with all. As in 4th grade, barely able to contain my excitement, only to have my mother glance at it and say, "Jennifer got all As, plus a special recognition award." What happened there? Jennifer was the daughter of her tennis partner and apparently the standard by which I should be measured. My mother had a special talent for finding flaws in my appearance. "Brielle, your hair is so flat today. Have you gained weight? That color washes you out completely." These comments peppered my childhood like tiny daggers, each one leaving a small wound that never quite healed. By 13, I was already hyper-aware of every physical imperfection, real or imagined. My father was different, but not better. Where my mother was actively critical, he was passively absent. He measured worth through professional success only. Family dinners, when he attended them, consisted of interrogations about academic performance and future prospects. Emotional needs were frivolous distractions from achievement. "Andrew's women are strong," he would say, whenever I showed any sign of hurt feelings, effectively cutting off any avenue for vulnerability. Our family operated on a currency of conditional love. Achievements were deposits, disappointments were withdrawals, and my account always seemed to be running on empty. Thomas thrived in this environment, embracing the competitive nature of our household. William adapted by becoming the charming one, deflecting pressure with humor and likability. I withdrew, finding refuge in art and books worlds, where I could escape the constant feeling of inadequacy. My teenage years only intensified the disconnect. While my friends complained about normal teenage conflicts with their parents' arguments about curfews or clothing choices, I envied them. Their parents cared enough to argue. Mine had moved beyond disappointment to a kind of cool indifference. I was the family project that never quite measured up to specifications. College was my escape. Syracuse University, with its renowned design program, was far enough from Connecticut to give me breathing room, but close enough that my parents could still brag about my attendance to their friends. For the first time, I found myself surrounded by people who appreciated my creativity and perspective. My roommate, Kimberly, became the first person who seemed to see me for who I was, not who someone expected me to be. Those 4 years were transformative. I discovered my passion for graphic design, found friends who valued authentic connection, and began the slow process of building self-worth that had been systematically dismantled throughout my childhood. Weekend visits home became increasingly uncomfortable as the contrast between my college life and family dynamics grew sharper. After graduation, I secured a job at a small design firm in Boston, putting physical distance between myself and Greenwich. My career flourished as I developed a reputation for innovative design work that blended artistic vision with practical marketing solutions. I bought my own apartment, made friends, dated occasionally, and built a life that felt authentically mine. Yet, despite my professional success and independence, family gatherings remained exercises in emotional endurance. Christmases, Thanksgivings, occasional summer visits, each one followed the same script. My brothers would showcase their achievements to parental approval, while my contributions to the conversation were treated as pleasant but ultimately insignificant diversions. As I entered my 30s, I made conscious efforts to establish a healthier relationship with my parents. I read books about adult children of emotionally unavailable parents, started therapy with Dr. Lauren Peters, and tried to adjust my expectations. I stopped seeking their approval and aimed instead for peaceful coexistence. I thought I had made progress, learning to shield myself from their subtle barbs and dismissals. Then came the invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house last year. I almost declined, having recently landed a major client that would keep me legitimately busy through the holiday. But Thomas was bringing his wife and 2 children. William was introducing his new fiancée, and my absence would be conspicuous. So, I accepted, preparing myself for the usual emotional obstacle course, never imagining that this particular dinner would become a turning point in our family history. The morning of Thanksgiving dawned cold and clear in Boston. I spent extra time getting ready, selecting a burgundy dress that was both professional and festive, applying makeup carefully and styling my hair into loose waves. Looking in the mirror, I gave myself the pep talk that had become ritual before family gatherings. 6 hours. You only need to survive 6 hours. Be pleasant, deflect personal questions, focus on the positive. I stopped at an upscale wine shop and purchased a $200 bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, a peace offering, and a subtle statement about my financial stability. The drive to Greenwich took nearly 3 hours with holiday traffic, giving me ample time to rehearse neutral conversation topics and breathing techniques my therapist had recommended for managing anxiety. The Andrews family home hadn't changed in decades, a stately colonial with black shutters and a wreath on the door that my mother changed seasonally. The interior was equally unchanged, decorated in the same elegant but sterile style family photos, arranged precisely on the mantel, each surface dust-free and immaculate. It was beautiful in the way museum displays are beautiful, perfect, but untouchable. My mother answered the door herself, dressed impeccably in a cream cashmere sweater and camel slacks, not a hair out of place, despite hours of cooking. "Brielle, you made it." We were beginning to wonder. No hug, just a critical once-over and a glance at her watch, though I was only 15 minutes past the suggested arrival time. The house was already full of voices. Extended family had been invited this year. My father's sister, Aunt Susan, and her husband, my mother's brother, Uncle Robert, with his wife and college-aged son, and my cousin Amanda, the only relative I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Amanda was 32, single like me, and worked as a veterinarian in Rhode Island. We had bonded over being the family outliers. I found Thomas in the living room holding court with tales of his recent court victory. His wife Natalie sat beside him, nodding at appropriate intervals, their children Madison and James playing quietly with tablets in the corner. Thomas acknowledged my arrival with a brief nod before continuing his story. William was in the kitchen, his arm around his fiancée, Caroline, a kindergarten teacher, with a warm smile who seemed almost too genuine for our family. "Hey sis," he called out. The only genuine welcome I'd received. William had always been the least affected by our parents' emotional economy, his natural charm creating a buffer zone of likability. "Brielle, darling." Aunt Susan approached, kissing my cheek and holding me at arm's length. Her eyes held that familiar mix of affection and pity that always made me uncomfortable. "You look lovely. How's the design business?" She was kind but had never understood why I hadn't pursued a more substantial career or marriage. Amanda rescued me, appearing with 2 glasses of wine. "Thank God you're here," she whispered as she handed me one. "Uncle Harold has been talking about tax law for 20 minutes. I was contemplating jumping out the bay window. Her easy humor was like oxygen in the suffocating atmosphere. The dining room table was a showcase of my mother's attention to detail. Fine china crystal glasses, silver candlesticks, and an elaborate centerpiece of autumn flowers and gourds. Name cards in calligraphy designated our seating arrangements, strategically placing me between Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan, far from Amanda and the support she offered. As we gathered for appetizers, conversation predictably centered on Thomas's recent promotion to junior partner and William's engagement. My father beamed with pride as Thomas detailed the corporate accounts he was now handling. Following right in my footsteps, he said, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. The Andrews name will mean something at that firm for another generation. When the conversation momentarily turned to me, I mentioned my new client, a national retail chain that had hired me to redesign their entire visual branding strategy. That sounds nice, dear, my mother said, already turning toward William. Now, tell everyone about the proposal, William. Caroline, show them the ring again. My father's only comment about my career came in the form of a question. Is there much stability in that field? Seems like companies would just handle that sort of thing in-house these days. Before I could answer, he was already discussing William's plans to join his future father-in-law's dental practice. Throughout the pre-dinner mingling, my mother managed several subtle digs about my personal life. Thomas was already married with Madison on the way at your age, and Caroline is from such a good family established in the community for generations with pointed looks in my direction. I noticed my expensive wine sitting unopened on the sideboard while my father served a different Cabernet. When I asked about it, my mother waved dismissively. Oh, we're saving that. It's not quite right for turkey dinner. The slight was small, but telling another reminder that my contributions were never quite good enough. The worst moment came when I overheard my parents in conversation with Uncle Robert. Thomas has always been our rock, my father was saying. And William brings such joy to everyone he meets. We've been truly blessed. The unspoken absence of any positive comment about their daughter hung in the air, but only I seemed to notice it. Amanda caught my eye from across the room and raised her eyebrows in silent support. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I no longer needed their approval. I had built a life I was proud of regardless of whether they valued it. 6 hours. I just needed to get through 6 more hours. Dinner service began precisely at 4 o'clock, my mother orchestrating the seating with the efficiency of a military commander. Small talk fluttered around the table as my father carved the turkey with ceremonial precision. I focused on maintaining a pleasant expression while contributing just enough to conversations to appear engaged without inviting scrutiny. My respite was short-lived. Between the turkey and mashed potatoes being passed, my mother launched her first direct interrogation. Brielle, are you seeing anyone these days? The question carried its usual subtext, a reminder of my failure to fulfill the expected female role in our family narrative. I'm focusing on my career right now. I replied the same answer I gave every holiday. Well, you know, careers are wonderful, but the biological clock waits for no woman, she said, sharing a knowing look with Natalie, who instinctively placed a hand on her pregnant belly. She was expecting their 3rd child in spring. You always were so focused on those drawings of yours. Thomas and William managed to build careers without sacrificing family. My father joined in with his own assessment. Creative fields are fine hobbies, but they rarely provide the stability needed for raising children properly. He said this while serving himself potatoes as casual as commenting on the weather. The conversation shifted as Thomas announced he had put a deposit down on a vacation home in the Berkshires. My parents reacted with enthusiastic approval, my mother already planning family gatherings there. William followed with news that Caroline's father was helping them with a down payment on a Tudor-style house in an exclusive neighborhood. More parental beaming ensued. When there was finally a lull, I attempted to share details about my major client project. The campaign will be nationwide, and they specifically sought me out after seeing my work for the museum exhibition last spring, I explained, unable to completely hide my pride. Uncle Robert seemed genuinely interested and asked a follow-up question, but my mother interrupted to ask if anyone wanted more cranberry sauce. The message was clear: my professional achievements weren't worthy of dinner conversation. The wine was flowing freely, and I reached for my glass, accidentally knocking it against the serving dish. A splash of red wine landed on my mother's pristine white tablecloth, a small stain no larger than a quarter. You would have thought I had set the table on fire. Brielle, my mother gasped, jumping up to dab at the spot with her napkin. This is Irish linen. It's been in the family for generations, her face flushed with anger disproportionate to the minor accident. I'm sorry, it was an accident, I said, reaching to help. Don't touch it, you'll make it worse, she snapped, waving my hand away. Just like the Christmas when you spilled grape juice on the carpet, Or when you broke the vase from Italy, always so careless. The room fell uncomfortable silent. Aunt Susan attempted to defuse the situation. Martha, accidents happen. Remember when I broke your mother's teacup? These things aren't important in the grand scheme. But my mother was not to be deterred. It's not just the tablecloth. It's the pattern of behavior, the constant disappointments. The last word hung in the air like a verdict. My father cleared his throat. Brielle has always been our creative one. Not always practical or careful. But we've learned to manage our expectations. Something in me snapped at those words. 35 years of suppressed responses rose to the surface. Manage your expectations. Is that what you call it? My father looked surprised that I had challenged him. Now, Brielle, let's not make a scene. Your mother works very hard on these gatherings. I wasn't making a scene until you both decided to use a wine stain as an opportunity to catalog my lifelong failures, I said, my voice calm but firm. This is exactly the problem, my mother said, looking to the other adults for support. So sensitive. Everything becomes a drama with you. Pointing out that you're being hurtful isn't being sensitive, Mother. It's having normal boundaries. The therapy sessions with Dr. Lauren were finally paying off. My father's face hardened. Boundaries. We provided everything for you, Brielle. Private school, college education, introductions to good families, and what do we get? An unmarried daughter approaching 40 with an unstable career who can't even come to dinner without creating problems. The words stung, but I held my ground. My career is actually quite successful. Not that either of you has ever shown interest enough to know that. My mother scoffed. Success is security, family contribution to community. Thomas and William understand that. And I don't, I asked. You've always been different, she said, not meeting my eyes. Difficult from the day you were born. Nothing we did was ever right for you. Thomas, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, attempted to intervene. Maybe we should just enjoy the meal. The turkey is getting cold. But my father wasn't finished. No, this needs to be said. We've walked on eggshells around Brielle for years. She needs to understand that family has expectations, responsibilities. Her lifestyle choices reflect on all of us. What lifestyle choices? I asked, genuinely confused. Having a career, I love living independently. Not marrying the first accountant or lawyer you tried to set me up with. The constant rebellion, my mother said. The art school phase we indulged thinking you'd grow out of it. The moving away when the Petersons offered you that marketing position right here in Greenwich. The series of inappropriate men you dated in your 20s. Inappropriate because they weren't from country club families, I challenged. Inappropriate because they encouraged this fantasy that you could build a life around drawing pictures, my father said dismissively. I took a deep breath. Graphic design is not drawing pictures. I have clients across the country. I earn 6 figures. I own my apartment outright. My mother waved her hand as if swatting away an irritating fly. Yes, your little business. But where has it gotten you? Alone at 35 while your brothers have built real lives. The accumulated hurt of decades rose within me. My life is real. Just because it doesn't match your narrow definition of success doesn't make it less valid. My father's face reddened. This attitude is exactly why we worry. Always defiant, never considering how your choices affect the family reputation. Harold, Aunt Susan cautioned, perhaps this isn't the time or place. But my mother, her composure cracking, looked directly at my father and said the words that would change everything. Harold, sometimes I wish she was never born. All she brings is chaos and disappointment. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. The entire table froze. My father, rather than objecting to this horrible statement, nodded in agreement. We had such hopes before you came along. The boys never caused these problems. Silence descended on the dining room. Amanda's face registered shock and horror. Aunt Susan's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Robert stared at his plate. Even Thomas and William looked uncomfortable. Natalie busied herself checking on the children, while Caroline sat rigid in her chair, likely reconsidering her future in this family. In that moment, I felt as if I had been struck physically. The air left my lungs, and a strange buzzing filled my ears. 35 years of seeking approval, of making myself smaller to fit into their expectations, of believing somehow that if I just found the right accomplishment or the right words, they would finally love me the way they loved my brothers. In one unguarded moment, they had confirmed what I had always suspected, but never wanted to believe. I was at best a disappointment, at worst, a regret. The seconds of silence stretched like years. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the subtle clink of ice shifting in water glasses, the distant sound of children playing in another room, blissfully unaware of the emotional grenade that had just detonated at the dinner table. Inside my mind, a lifetime of trying to earn love flashed before me, a sad montage of efforts met with indifference or criticism. In that crystalline moment of clarity, I realized no achievement, no conformity, no self-diminishment would ever be enough. The problem had never been me, it had been their inability to love unconditionally. I felt something shift inside me, a breaking, but also a release, like a bone that must be broken to be reset properly. The pain was excruciating but necessary. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood from my chair. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady when I finally spoke. "Perfect. Then you won't need me when you're old." My mother's expression shifted from righteous indignation to confusion. I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. "I will be contacting your attorney tomorrow to ensure I am removed from your will. I will also be signing documents that release me from any legal or financial obligation to your care as you age. Since my existence has been such a disappointment, I wouldn't want to burden you with my presence or support in your final years." The color drained from my mother's face as the implications of her words, and my response registered. My father's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish, suddenly finding itself on dry land. "Brielle, you're overreacting," he finally managed. "Your mother was just upset about the tablecloth." "No, father. For once you both spoke your truth. And now I'm speaking mine. I've spent my entire life trying to earn love that should have been freely given. That project is now complete." Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Amanda stood up, moved to my side of the table, and placed a hand on my shoulder in silent solidarity. "You can't just... Family is family." My mother stammered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Yes, family is family," I agreed. "Which is why your words hurt so deeply. But they were also a gift. They've freed me from the illusion that I somehow failed as a daughter. The truth is, you failed as parents, at least with me." William half rose from his seat. "Sis, maybe we should all take a breath here. I've been taking breaths and swallowing hurt for decades, Will. I'm done." I reached for my purse and coat. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner. I won't be troubling you with my disappointing presents at Christmas." With legs that felt simultaneously like lead and like they might give way beneath me, I walked toward the foyer. Amanda followed, grabbing her own coat. "I think I'll head out too, Aunt Martha, Uncle Harold." Her voice was cool and formal. Family loyalty clearly had its limits even for her. Behind us, I could hear the beginnings of damage control. My father's authoritative, "She's always been dramatic," and my mother's tearful, "I didn't mean it that way." Thomas's lawyerly "let's all just calm down," and various uncomfortable throat clearings from the extended family. None of it touched me. I was already gone emotionally, the cord that had bound me to their approval, finally, irrevocably severed. The drive home was a blur of highway lights through tears. Amanda had offered to follow me back to Boston, but I needed solitude to process what had just happened. I promised to call her when I got home safely. The strange thing was, beneath the hurt and shock, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, as if I had been carrying a boulder on my shoulders for years and had finally set it down. The pain was real and raw, but so was the relief. My apartment welcomed me with its familiar comfort, decorated in the vibrant colors and artistic touches my mother had always deemed excessive. I kicked off my heels, poured a generous glass of wine, and sat in my favorite reading chair by the window overlooking the city lights. Then, finally alone, I allowed myself to break down completely. Great heaving sobs that came from the deepest part of me, grief. Not just for today's wounds, but for the childhood love. I had never received the approval I had chased. Like a mirage in the desert. Around 11, my phone began to light up with notifications. Amanda checking in. William sending an awkward text about how mom didn't really mean it. Thomas, ever the lawyer, suggesting we all meet to discuss this rationally. And finally, a voicemail from my mother. Brielle, this is your mother. As if I wouldn't recognize her voice after 35 years. There seems to have been a misunderstanding at dinner. Your father and I were stressed with hosting, and things were said in the heat of the moment. We expect you'll realize this was all a misunderstanding once you've calmed down. We'll speak tomorrow. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an expectation that I would fall back into the established pattern, accepting crumbs of attention and pretending they were a feast. I turned off my phone, wrapped myself in a soft blanket, and allowed the emotional exhaustion to pull me toward sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in my life, I had stood in my truth and refused to make myself small for people who couldn't appreciate my worth. It hurt like hell, and it was exactly what needed to happen. The week following Thanksgiving was a blur of emotional processing. I called in sick to work for 3 days, something I had never done before. My body seemed to physically rebel against the decades of suppressed emotions, now surging through my system, manifesting in headaches, exhaustion, and a persistent knot in my stomach. On Monday, I managed to make it to my scheduled appointment with Dr. Lauren. I walked into her warmly lit office, sat down on the familiar blue couch, and promptly burst into tears before she even asked a question. I told my parents off at Thanksgiving. I finally managed between sobs. They said they wished I'd never been born, and I told them they wouldn't have me in their old age. Dr. Lauren handed me tissues and listened attentively as I recounted the entire disastrous dinner. When I finished, rather than looking shocked, she nodded thoughtfully. Brielle, we've been discussing your family dynamics for 2 years now. What happened at dinner was painful but not surprising given the patterns you've described. But normal parents don't tell their children they wish they were never born, I protested. No, they don't, she agreed. What you're describing fits a pattern we've discussed before. Your parents, particularly your mother, display many characteristics consistent with narcissistic personality traits. We spent the session examining the lifelong pattern of emotional manipulation and conditional approval. Dr. Lauren helped me understand that the dinner confrontation, while traumatic, represented a breaking of dysfunctional patterns that had kept me locked in a cycle of seeking approval that would never come. This isn't about one dinner or one comment, she explained. This is about a lifetime of emotional neglect that has affected your self-worth, your relationships, and your ability to recognize healthy attachments. By Wednesday, my phone had collected 27 missed calls and 16 voicemails from various family members. My parents had moved from denial to anger to using my brothers as proxies. Thomas left lawyerly messages about family unity and proportional responses. William's messages were more emotional, a mixture of defending our parents and expressing genuine concern for me. My friend Kimberly showed up at my apartment Wednesday evening with Thai food and no expectations. Unlike family, she didn't demand explanations or try to solve the situation. She simply sat with me, offering the quiet companionship I desperately needed. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, she said, serving tom yum soup into bowls. But I'm here if you need me. I found myself telling her everything, the words pouring out in a cathartic release. Kimberly, who came from a loving, if sometimes chaotic family, was appropriately horrified. I knew your parents were cold, but that's beyond cold. That's cruel, she said when I finished. You know this isn't your fault, right? No child deserves to hear those words. Her simple validation broke something open in me, the realization that I had spent a lifetime internalizing blame for my parents' inability to connect emotionally with me. By the second week, I had turned my phone back on but set up filters that sent my family's communications to a separate folder I could check when emotionally prepared. An invitation to Christmas at my parents' arrived via email, as if nothing had happened. I declined politely but firmly, establishing my first real boundary. This triggered a new wave of pressure. Thomas called to inform me that my absence would ruin Christmas for everyone. William pleaded that it would kill Mom if the family wasn't together for the holidays. Even Aunt Susan reached out to suggest that families should forgive each other. I stood firm. "I'm not ready, and I'm not obligated to pretend everything is fine when it isn't," became my mantra. The physical symptoms of anxiety that had plagued me for years, which I had normalized as just part of my personality, began to gradually diminish as I enforced this boundary. The constant knot in my stomach loosened. The tension headaches became less frequent. I slept more soundly than I had in years. I focused on rediscovering joy in small things. My morning coffee on my balcony. The satisfaction of completing a design exactly as I had envisioned it. A spontaneous dinner with friends. These simple pleasures had always been available to me, but they had been overshadowed by the constant anxiety of familial disappointment. Still, the Thanksgiving confrontation left emotional aftershocks. I would be fine for days, then suddenly find myself reliving the moment my mother said those words, experiencing physical symptoms similar to panic attacks, complete with racing heart and difficulty breathing. Dr. Lauren explained this as a trauma response and gave me techniques to ground myself when these episodes occurred. Art became my therapy. Late at night, when sleep eluded me, I would sit at my drafting table and create abstract pieces that expressed what I couldn't put into words, bold lines and colors, representing anger, flowing curves, showing grief, light, breaking through, darkness symbolizing hope. These weren't for clients or for show, they were for me alone, visual representations of my healing journey. In January, at Dr. Lauren's suggestion, I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally unavailable parents. The first meeting was revelatory. 8 strangers sat in a circle, each telling stories that echoed parts of my own experience. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in my struggle, or broken for my inability to secure my parents' love. One participant in particular, Martin, a 38-year-old architect with kind eyes and a quiet manner, shared a story of emotional neglect that paralleled my own in many ways. After the meeting, we talked for an hour in the coffee shop next door, the easy understanding between us a stark contrast to the constant effort required in family interactions. As winter progressed, I built stronger connections with my chosen family, the friends who showed up consistently with love that didn't come with conditions or expectations. Kimberly, who called to check in every few days. My colleague Jackson, who noticed my occasional distraction at work and covered for me without making me feel indebted. Amanda, who drove up from Rhode Island one weekend just to take me to a museum exhibition she thought I'd enjoy. Professionally, I channeled my emotional energy into my work. The major retail client was thrilled with my preliminary designs. The creative director commenting that my concepts had emotional resonance beyond the typical rebrand. I threw myself into the project, finding that my newfound emotional awareness translated into more authentic design work. Meanwhile, my parents escalated their attempts to regain control of the narrative and my compliance. Flying monkeys, as the support group called them, appeared in the form of family friends, calling to tell me how worried my parents were, distant relatives, suddenly interested in my well-being, and eventually a carefully worded letter from my father that acknowledged I might have perceived hurt, but stopped short of taking any responsibility. Dr. Lauren introduced me to the gray rock technique, a way of making myself emotionally uninteresting to manipulative people by giving neutral, non-engaging responses. When forced to interact with my parents through text or email about practical matters, I kept communications brief, factual, and devoid of emotional hooks they could use to pull me back into old patterns. The first holiday season spent away from family was both lonely and liberating. I declined all family invitations and instead accepted Kimberly's offer to join her family for Christmas Day. The contrast was illuminating. Her parents bickered good-naturedly, teased each other, and showed genuine interest in my work and life. Their love for each other and their children was imperfect but palpable, expressed through inside jokes, thoughtful gifts, and physical affection that came naturally rather than being performed for appearance. I returned to my apartment that evening with a mixture of gratitude for the day and grief for what I had never experienced in my own family. Yet, beneath the sadness was an unexpected feeling, one I was only beginning to recognize, a sense of peace that came from no longer chasing an impossible goal or trying to be someone I wasn't to earn conditional love. The new year brought a strange gift. The growing certainty that, while the Thanksgiving confrontation had been painful, it had also been necessary, the catalyst for a healing process that had been decades overdue. 3 months after Thanksgiving, I agreed to meet my parents at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between Boston and Greenwich. Dr. Lauren had helped me prepare for this meeting role, playing potential scenarios and establishing clear boundaries for the conversation. I wasn't seeking reconciliation so much as closure, a chance to speak my truth calmly and clearly now that the initial shock had passed. I arrived early, selecting a table near the back that offered some privacy without being completely isolated. I ordered a chamomile tea to calm my nerves and practiced the breathing techniques that had become second nature over the past months. My parents arrived precisely on time, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. My mother had lost weight, her cashmere sweater hanging slightly loose on her frame. My father's confident stride seemed diminished, his shoulders slightly stooped. For the first time, I saw them not as the towering figures of my childhood, but as aging, flawed humans whose own unresolved issues had shaped their parenting. They approached the table with awkward formality, as if meeting a business associate rather than their daughter. My mother attempted a hug, which I gently sidestepped, gesturing for them to sit. "You look well," my mother said after they had ordered coffee. "That color suits you." Her attempt at normalcy, as if the Thanksgiving incident had been a minor disagreement rather than a fundamental rupture. "Thank you for meeting us," my father added. "We thought it was time to put this unfortunate situation behind us and move forward as a family." Their approach was exactly as Dr. Lauren had predicted, an attempt to minimize what had happened and re-establish the status quo without addressing the underlying issues. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to establish some parameters for our conversation. I'm here to speak honestly about our relationship and what happened at Thanksgiving. I'm not interested in pretending it didn't happen, or that it was a misunderstanding." My father frowned. "Brielle, everyone says things they don't mean in the heat of the moment. Your mother was upset about the tablecloth, which has sentimental value. You know how she gets about family heirlooms." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," I replied. Reducing what happened to a momentary overreaction ignores the pattern it represents. "You said you wished I had never been born." Those aren't words said in a moment of irritation over a wine stain. My mother's eyes filled with tears, a response I had seen countless times when confronted with her own behavior. "You've always been so sensitive, taking everything to heart." "Of course we didn't mean it literally. We were frustrated with your attitude." "My attitude of existing in a way that doesn't match your expectations," I asked. "Because that's the core issue here. You've never been able to see me for who I am, only for who I've failed to be according to your standards." My father's face hardened. "We gave you everything, every advantage, every opportunity, and you respond with this, ingratitude." "I'm not ungrateful for the material advantages," I clarified. "I'm hurt by the emotional neglect that came with them. The constant message that I wasn't enough, that my brothers were the successful ones while I was the disappointment." "We never said that," my mother protested. "You didn't have to say it explicitly. It was in every comparison, every dismissal of my achievements, every conversation that centered entirely around Thomas and William, while my contributions were treated as afterthoughts." My father shifted uncomfortably. "If we focused on your brothers, it's because they never gave us cause for concern. They followed traditional paths that make sense. And because I chose a creative career and remained single, I was a concern," I asked. "We just wanted security for you," my mother insisted. "A stable marriage, children, a conventional life. Is that so terrible?" "What's terrible is that you never asked what I wanted, what would make me happy. You decided what my life should look like and then punished me emotionally for not conforming to that vision." I proceeded to outline specific instances throughout my life, from childhood through adulthood, where their conditional love had been painfully evident. The elementary school art show they skipped to attend Thomas's baseball game. The high school graduation where my father's only comment was about the valedictorian's speech rather than my own academic achievements. The countless holidays where my professional successes were treated as cute hobbies while my brothers' careers were discussed in detail. My parents shifted between defensive anger and teary manipulation as I spoke. They attempted to rewrite history, claiming they had always supported my artistic tendencies, but had merely expressed natural parental concern about my future. They suggested my memories were distorted, that I was focusing on negative experiences while ignoring their sacrifices. "I don't doubt that you love me in your way," I acknowledged. "But your love has always been conditional on me fitting into your narrow definition of success. When I failed to do that, your disappointment was palpable." "What do you want from us, Brielle?" my father finally asked, frustration evident in his voice. "An apology." "Fine, we apologize for what was said at Thanksgiving. It was inappropriate." The non-apology hung in the air between us. No acknowledgement of the deeper pattern, no real understanding of the hurt caused, just a perfunctory statement meant to close the subject. "I don't want an apology that doesn't come with understanding," I said quietly. "What I want is recognition of who I actually am, not who you wish I was. I want acknowledgement that my path, while different from my brother's, has value and merit. But most of all, I want to stop pretending that we have a close, functional relationship when we don't." My mother gasped. "What are you saying, that you want to cut us off?" "Over one comment." "Not over one comment. Over a lifetime of comments, dismissals, and emotional unavailability. I'm not cutting you off entirely, but I am establishing boundaries. Limited contact on my terms when I feel emotionally equipped to handle it." My father's face darkened. "And what about family obligations? Holidays? Family gatherings? Do you expect everyone to accommodate your feelings?" "I expect to be treated with basic respect and consideration. When I feel that's possible, I'll participate in family events. When it's not, I won't." My mother's tears flowed freely now. "This will break your father's heart." "Is that what you want, to punish us?" "This isn't about punishment," I explained, remaining calm, despite the emotional manipulation. "It's about self-preservation. I've spent my whole life trying to earn your approval at the expense of my own well-being. I can't do that anymore." "And the will?" my father asked bluntly. Was that threat serious? The question revealed so much about his priorities. "Yes. I don't want or need your money. Inheritance often comes with strings attached in this family, and I'm cutting those strings." "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "Family is everything. You'll regret this approach when you're older and alone." "I'm not alone," I replied. "I have meaningful connections with people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them or how I reflect on them." The remainder of the conversation circled similar themes, my parents unable or unwilling to truly hear what I was saying. They fluctuated between anger, dismissal, and tearful pleas, none of which acknowledged the fundamental issues at hand. As we prepared to leave, my mother made one final attempt. "We're not getting any younger, Brielle. Do you really want these to be the terms of our relationship in our final years?" "No," I answered honestly. "I wish we could have the warm, supportive relationship I've always wanted. But that would require changes I don't think you're willing to make. So this is the healthiest option available to me right now." I walked away from the cafe with a complicated mixture of emotions. Sadness for the relationship we would never have, relief at having spoken my truth clearly, and a new sense of liberation from expectations that had bound me for decades. That evening I received a text from my mother. "We only ever wanted what was best for you. Someday you'll understand when you have children of your own." Her words confirmed what the conversation had already made clear, that true understanding and change were unlikely. The path forward would not include the parental relationship I had longed for, but it would include something equally valuable: freedom from the pursuit of approval I would never receive. 1 year after the Thanksgiving confrontation that changed everything, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. My apartment, once decorated to please occasional parental visits, now fully reflected my personality. Vibrant abstract paintings, including several of my own, hung on walls painted in rich, saturated colors my mother would have deemed excessive. Eclectic furniture chosen for comfort, rather than status, filled the space with warmth and personality. My design business had not just survived the emotional upheaval but thrived. The authenticity I had found in my personal life translated to my professional work, allowing me to connect more deeply with clients' needs and vision. I had hired 2 junior designers and moved into a small but stylish office space, specializing in clients who valued innovation over convention. The friends who had supported me through the family rupture had become my chosen family. Our bonds strengthened through shared experiences and mutual respect. Kimberly and I had a standing Sunday brunch date. Jackson and his partner had become regular dinner companions. Amanda drove up from Rhode Island at least once a month for weekend adventures exploring New England. My relationship with Martin had developed gradually from support group acquaintances to friends to something deeper. Unlike previous relationships where I had unconsciously sought to replicate the conditional approval dynamic of my childhood, this connection was built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Martin understood the complicated grief of mourning parents who were still living, and his own healing journey complemented mine. Contact with my parents continued, but on dramatically different terms. Our interactions were limited to occasional phone calls and carefully structured visits that included clear boundaries and time limits. I no longer attended extended family gatherings at their home, but occasionally met them at restaurants for brief lunches when I felt emotionally equipped to handle the interaction. My mother still attempted manipulation tactics, though less frequently as they proved ineffective. My father maintained a certain emotional distance, uncomfortable with the new dynamic, where his authority was not automatically respected. But they had learned, if reluctantly, that my boundaries were non-negotiable. My relationship with my brothers had evolved in divergent ways. William, always the more emotionally intuitive of the two, had made genuine efforts to understand my perspective. After several honest conversations, he acknowledged the disparity in how we had been treated growing up. While still close to our parents, he respected my boundaries and never pressured me to fix the situation for family harmony. Thomas remained firmly entrenched in the family system, unable or unwilling to see the dysfunction that had shaped our childhood. He maintained that I was overreacting and occasionally attempted to broker reconciliation on our parents' terms. Our relationship had become distant but civil, limited to brief interactions at events involving his children, whom I refused to lose connection with, despite the complicated family dynamics. The ongoing work of healing continued through therapy, support groups, and self-reflection. Dr. Lauren had helped me understand that recovery from childhood emotional neglect wasn't a destination but a journey with progress measured in small victories and increased self-awareness. The hypervigilance that had been my constant companion, always monitoring for signs of disapproval, gradually diminished, allowing me to be more present in my daily life. Setting boundaries had ripple effects beyond my family relationships. I became more confident in professional negotiations, more selective about clients, and more assertive in personal relationships. The people-pleasing habits of a lifetime didn't disappear overnight, but I caught myself more quickly when falling into old patterns. Most significantly, the need for external validation, which had driven so many of my choices, began to loosen its grip. I learned to recognize my own achievements without needing someone else to affirm their value. This internal validation proved more stable and sustaining than the approval I had chased for so long. Forgiveness came slowly and in unexpected ways. Not the convenient forgiveness that excuses harmful behavior or pretends it never happened, but the deeper forgiveness that acknowledges the full reality of what occurred while releasing the expectation that things should have been different. I came to understand that my parents' products of their own emotionally sterile upbringings had given what they were capable of giving limited. Though it was. This understanding didn't erase the hurt or justify their behavior, but it allowed me to see them as flawed humans rather than all-powerful figures who had withheld love intentionally. The anger that had initially fueled my boundary setting gradually transformed into a calm determination to create a different life story for myself. My chosen family helped me build new traditions to replace those lost with the family estrangement. Thanksgiving, once the most anxiety-producing holiday, became a Friendsgiving celebration at my apartment filled with laughter, acceptance, and genuine connection. Christmas was spent with Kimberly's warm, chaotic family, who had unofficially adopted me as one of their own. The final piece of my healing journey came with the recognition that I could redefine family on my own terms. Family wasn't determined solely by blood and obligation. but could be created through authentic connection and mutual care. The people who showed up consistently with love and support were my true family, regardless of shared DNA. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' cruel words at that Thanksgiving dinner had ultimately freed me from the endless cycle of seeking their approval. Their statement meant to wound had instead severed the chains of obligation and expectation that had bound me to their vision of who I should be. On the anniversary of that fateful dinner, I sat in my living room surrounded by friends sharing a meal prepared with love rather than obligation. Looking around at these people who saw and valued me exactly as I was, I felt a profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had brought me here. The path hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, days of grief, and the complicated emotions that come with setting boundaries with family. But on the other side of that pain was a life of authenticity, meaningful connections, and the quiet joy of living according to my own values rather than someone else's expectations. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who couldn't see your worth? Comment below and share your experience. Sometimes the most painful decisions lead to the greatest growth. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more stories of finding strength in difficult situations, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in their family struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your worth isn't determined by those who can't appreciate it.